For the last little while, we've been looking at the fruit of the Holy Spirit, about the fruition of this faith that we profess, the kind of the practical outcomes, the KPIs, if you like, of whether this stuff is real or it's something that we've just kind of invented or give intellectual assent to. And today we're looking at another one of those. Mandy's going to cover another one next week. I gave her the option. I said you can either preach on, you can preach whenever you like, but I'd like you to preach on either faithfulness or self-control. Which one do you think she picked? Faithfulness, and she left me with self-control, so that was not a good choice. But we'll get to self-control after I learn a little bit about it in my own life at times. But today we're going to look at gentleness and about how it is that we can be people who demonstrate the gentleness of God, the gentleness that brings fruition in our life, or the fruit of the Spirit that manifests itself in gentleness, and go from there. But here's a kind of a thought provoker, particularly in the context of our world at the moment. The central question for us as Christians really is, the central question for Christianity is really not, is this progressive or conservative? The central question for us as Christians is this Christ-like or not? That's how we decide things, isn't it? Yeah? I feel very alone in the room. Christ-likeness. What would Jesus do? If Jesus said it, we should practice it. If Jesus commanded it, we should obey it. If Jesus said avoid it, we should avoid it. If Jesus says get rid of it, we should get rid of it. So in the political climate in which we are now in our world and even in our nation, we've always got to remember as Christians that we need to ask that question, the last question, before the first question. Is this Christ-like or not? And that informs not just the way that we live, but it informs the way that we witness and the way that we love, the way that the fruit of the Spirit that comes into our life. Many of you have seen the 1939 movie at some time in your life. It's on my list of movies that I have not seen, and I only saw it last year. And you'll be quite surprised at this movie that I've never seen. You might remember, you won't remember, but I only recently saw Forrest Gump, so that's how behind I am. But last year I sat down on a rainy day with my daughter and I watched a movie I had not seen. And it was a brand new release of a very old movie that was made in 1939. It's called, this might be unfamiliar too, it's called The Wizard of Oz. Has anybody like me never seen The Wizard of Oz? And I watched The Wizard of Oz, and there was this new print, this Blu-ray print, and it was fantastic, and we had a great afternoon watching that. It scared me a little bit because I'm a bit like that, but it was a great movie. So I want to show you a 2-minute clip. I was going to show you the whole movie, but I thought you've got things to do. But I want to show you this in the context of something that Dorothy says. So let's just look at this for a couple of minutes and then I'll sort of talk about that after. I'll have to turn it.
Come forward!
Tell me when it's over. Look at that. Look at that. I want to go home.
I am Oz, the great and powerful. Who are you? Who are you?
If you please, I am Dorothy, the small and meek. We've come to ask you.
Silence!
Oh, Jiminy Cricket.
The great and powerful Oz knows why you have come. Step forward, Tin Man. You dare to come to me for a heart, do you? You clinking, clanking, clattering collection of colliginous junk?
Yes, sir. Yes, Your Honor. You see, a while back, we were walking down the yellow brick road, and...
Quiet! And you, Scarecrow, have the effrontery to ask for a brain. You billowing bale of bovine fodder!
Yes, Your Honor. I mean, Your Excellency. Your wizardry.
Enough! And you, lion! Well?
You ought to be ashamed of yourself, frightening him like that when he came to you for help.
Silence, whippersnapper! The beneficent Oz has every intention of granting your requests.
What's that? What'd he say?
So if somebody's just walked in, they think we're at like a movie club or something meeting. I thought that'd be odd if you were late. The reason I showed you that clip was that of this quote that she said, "I am Dorothy, the small and the meek." And we know through that story, I don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't seen it, but we know that Dorothy is anything but weak or meek as the world understands it. But she's pretty fearsome. She's not a doormat or a damsel in distress. She kind of moves through life with all kinds of confidence. Now, the reason I say this is to say this is that the fruit of the Spirit, when we look at this word gentleness, we can tend to think of kind of a passivity that is really not encompassed in the word, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But today we're looking at this next aspect of the fruition of the Spirit's activity in our lives and what it produces in us. The word that we translate in Greek as meekness is gentleness, and it has all sorts of connotations about it. But the synonyms, are about humility and courtesy and consideration, mildness and meekness. But it has the idea that meekness is not weakness. It really is the idea of strength under control. It has very close links with the other spiritual fruition of the Spirit, and that is self-control. And prowess was used in the New Testament times largely to describe animals that had been domesticated. If you have a group of wild horses, this is a scene from Rob and Wendy's place out on the property there, and if you have a bunch of wild horses, and then there's a point in which they come into that domestic situation, and that great power becomes a power under control. And so just like a wild horse that has been trained to obey command or answer to the reins of its riders, the animal is still just as powerful as it was before it was trained or tamed or domesticated. But that power is now exerted in the right direction at the right amount. Self-control and this week's virtue of gentleness sort of go together. There's all sorts of interesting proverbs. If you haven't read Proverbs are probabilities. But Proverbs 25:28 says this: "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." One of the reasons we are to be people who have self-control is that the walls of protection remain strong around us. That's one of the reasons that when you drink to excess or you take stuff that alters your sense of control, it's a bad thing. It's not just bad for you physically, it's bad for you spiritually. Because those walls of protection, of control, if you like, are lowered and anything can happen. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a person who has no control over his spirit. So without gentleness, we've got power, but we've got little control over it. And people who are not gentle are people who are like unwalled, vulnerable cities. They're vulnerable to attack. And it tells us that gentle people are self-controlled people, but they're also strong people, because meekness does not equal weakness. It takes more strength to control your temper than it does to storm a city. You've probably met people, you might be a person like this, who just goes, well, I just lose control. If something annoys me, I just let fly. I don't care what damage it makes. I don't care what the outcome is. I don't care what the casualties will be. I just feel that I can just let go. Well, the fruit of the Spirit is having that ability to be angry and righteously angry, but to have some control over it. Gentleness and meekness does not mean weakness. In fact, it's the opposite. Gentleness isn't passivity either. A gentle person is both intentional and involved. But in our world, we don't really value gentleness that much. If you're in sales or marketing, I wonder if gentleness is high on the preferable character traits of a person who's in sales for their commission. I wonder if gentleness is a part of how people close their deals and become more successful. Do we climb the ladder on the rungs of gentleness in our world? Well, not so much. It seems to me to be a respected leader in our world, there's a sort of sense of, well, they're not very gentle, they're not very self-controlled, they're not very kind, but boy, they get the job done, you know? Well, the problem with that is the job might get done, but it doesn't bring honour to anybody. True leadership is gentleness under control. So if you're running for political office, I would say that most people will not advertise themselves as a candidate to say, vote for me, for I am gentle. They're not the kind of words that people use in our world. People don't elect the gentle often. So all these virtues that we're studying, the first fruits, or these fruits that we're learning to bear, make us like Jesus. God became flesh, and we understand the character of Jesus more and more as we learn to know him and read about him and walk with him. But in Isaiah 40, it says these great things about God. It says that God, our Father, he will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms, and he will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. There is one of the great characteristics about God is that he is gentle, but he is not weak. God is gentle, he is tender-hearted, he is compassionate. That's why God became flesh, and the same attributes were present in the Word made flesh, God made flesh in Jesus Christ, who spoke and acted with boldness and bravery, but at the same time he was gentle. He demonstrated the power to calm storms, to heal the sick, even raise the dead, but at the same time he was gentle. Now, Jesus could have used any words that he wanted about himself and they would fit perfectly. He could have used the word great, mighty, best, fairest, the one, the only, whatever it might be. But the greatest insight we get into Jesus' character is when he, in fact, spoke about himself in the terms of being gentle, that he was a gentle presence in this world, that he was, in fact, the one who leads us gently, that he was able to give us that sense of gentleness around. Jesus is the one who is gentle. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." This is Jesus talking, "For I am great and mighty." Now, the Bible says that he says, "For I am humble and gentle in heart, and you will find rest." You will find rest for your souls. You'll find rest for your souls. So what does that look like for us? What does it mean to be a person who is gentle, but who is meek, but not weak? What is it like to live our lives with this great strength of God, but to have it under control? Think of how gently Jesus sort of dealt with people as he came around. The one that strikes me is the Samaritan woman, when others would judge her and others would fob her off as somebody who was not worthy of their attention, that they would have some sort of racial stereotype or gender stereotype against her, that they would be the kind of ones that he would be able to connect with in ways that they would not. When the disciples came back after he had discussed these things with him, that they discovered that he in fact was gentle with her, that he was having a conversation with her. He didn't condone her situation, didn't condone her actions, but he was gentle with her. So we got to learn to live gently. We got to live gently with each other. Instead of yelling curses at each other and our frustrations at each other, we are gentle because of his gentleness to us. There's a great banner headline in all this where it talks about this in Philippians. It says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. So one of the things that we need to be known for as Christians is not just people of love and joy and peace and patience, but we need to be known as people who are gentle. That we have our opinions, we have our strengths, but those strengths are always under control. That gentleness is something that is not a mark of weakness, not a mark of do whatever you want to me, but it is a mark of the fruit of the Spirit of God. Christians who are growing Christians are known as gentle people. Anyway, gentleness is following in the character of the Lord Jesus Christ, who asks us to take his yoke, which is his burden, his way, his life upon him, because he's gentle and lowly in heart, or humble in heart. So I just want to round that off a little bit about some practical steps that we might take about being gentle. How does it sort of look to us? Do we look at each other sort of po-faced and kind of not react to anything? What does gentleness actually look like? Because we're called to let our gentleness, or let the Spirit of God's gentleness be evident to all. So there's a few categories that we could look at. It's particularly prevalent as we relate to people with whom we are the closest. I was told very young in ministry that your first ministry, Ian, is your family. That's your first ministry. There's a church to run and pastor and whatever, but your first ministry is your family, those who are closest to you. Now, you wouldn't have to think I'd have to say this, but sadly I do. The truth is that gentleness is scarcely evident in homes. And sometimes familiarity breeds contempt, but it also breeds a lack of gentleness. And people will say stuff and react to those who they're closest to in ways that really are contemptuous and lacking in gentleness. And sometimes the better we know people, the less gentle we are towards them. That's not good. That's not Christ-like. We need to treat particularly those who are closest to us with gentleness. Doesn't mean we always agree with everybody we say or do. Paul, the apostle, was admonishing husbands and wives in Ephesians, the book of Ephesians. And he said, submit yourselves to each other out of reverence to Christ. So the way that you treat each other, or the way that we treat each other, husbands, wives, friends, family, whatever it might be, we do so out of reverence to Christ. It's actually an act of worship, if you like, the way that we speak to each other, particularly those whom we know well. Another proverb in Proverbs 15 verse 1 says, a gentle answer turns away judgment or wrath. A gentle answer turns away wrath. I listened to a bunch of podcasts over the course of the week, and just as I'm walking or driving around, and I listened to this one called This American Life, which is by NPR. And they had an episode recently called Know When to Fold 'Em. And I thought it was a Kenny Rogers tribute or something about cards or something. But it focused on a man called David Dickinson. And upon Dickinson's return, he had been estranged from his family. And as a young man from a Christian household, and he'd not visited that home until he had a big blue with his dad. And he left for college and never came back. But David went through this process as many young angry men do, where he graduated and he became very successful in his career. One of the things that drove him in his career was this kind of attitude towards his parents to kind of say, well, I can do it on my own. And his plan was to revisit and go back to his family after a 10-year absence. And he was going back with a mission. And the mission was to undermine his father's repressive faith. His father was a Christian guy and was a person of faith, and David had built up a whole lot of hurt and callous about that. And in it, David said, because I got the transcript of the podcast, and he says this, he said, on my way back, I had all this ammunition, and I couldn't wait to use it. I remember thinking, this is a showdown, because my dad and I are at war. My dad didn't know this, but I was at war with him, and I was at war with all Christians because of him. And I was just waiting for an excuse to have my shot. When his father innocently mentioned, he got back there, some mission work that he'd been praying about, David, who was angry, unleashed this fury upon his dad. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years. David says, I just rambled on like this, and as I knew essentially while I was doing this, I was assaulting my father's dream and values. Saying everything that he was excited about and that he was sharing with me was misbegotten, a bad idea and morally corrupt. And he just kind of let me do my thing. David's father let him expend every round of ammunition without arguing or retaliating. The father simply looked at David and said, David, I'm really proud of everything you've done in your career. And there was silence. At the end of the show, David concludes by saying, I remember looking at my father and thinking I had sort of expected to argue, not to win, but to come to some kind of armistice. You know, some kind of truce. And I hadn't experienced and I hadn't expected to lose completely. And then he said these words, because you can't argue with decency, you can't argue with gentle goodness. And the story goes on that father and son started a process of reconciliation. It didn't happen that afternoon, but 5 years down the track, they were reconciled. A gentle answer turns away wrath. One of the main places we get to demonstrate that is with people whom God has placed us with. Our families, our loved ones, our friends, all that. Philippians 4 and 5 says, let your gentleness be evident to all. But it's not just those who are close to us, it's also in the way we respond to those who are hurting. Jesus, in my reading of the New Testament, never turned away a genuinely hurting person. He was gentle with everyone when he needed, and he was firm with everyone who needed it. He had this power that was under control. Christ-like people are tender-hearted people, not calloused, hard-hearted people. They are welcoming people, they are open people, they are accepting people, they are changeable people, they are teachable people. Because they realise that they too fall short of the mark. Jeff Bridges, who was quite a popular writer in the 1980s and 90s, he said this, that gentleness is illustrated by the way we would handle a carton of exquisite crystal glasses. It is a recognition that the human personality is valuable but fragile and must be handled with care. We all want to be treated with care, but it's another thing when we want to treat other people with care. The world needs Christ followers who are like him, gentle people, people who are humble and lowly in heart, who demonstrate that they too are the bruised reeds of this world. There's a really interesting verse in Galatians chapter 1 where it says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should help that person back onto the right path. Another version says, you should restore that person gently. Now, I may have mentioned before, but this is the same level of care that a person would use when they are performing eye surgery. Some of you guys have had eye surgery, cataracts and stuff like that, people we won't mention. But as that person is performing that surgery, they are absolutely careful because they know that is a very important part of your body, and so they are gentle. Well, it's the same word picture here. When one of us fail and one of us fall, instead of everybody piling on and throwing rocks, we're actually to treat each other with the same care as we would if we were performing eye surgery on them. In other words, we have to acknowledge that we are all people who need the care and grace and gentleness of Jesus Christ. So, how are we doing about being gentle with people who are hurting in this world? It could be a hurting neighbour or a co-worker who's going through a tough time. It could be a spouse, a child, whatever it might be. We need to be gentle with those who are close to, the people who are hurting, but also we need to respond in gentleness to people who seek to hurt us. Jesus said this quite shocking thing to the original hearers. He said to those who had gathered, he said, you have heard it said, in other words, referring to an Old Testament, an old covenant, an old way. You have heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. Seems fair enough, doesn't it? Love my neighbour, hate my enemy. We've all heard that. We've all read that. They all knew that. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Who are the people who hurt us? A relative, a co-worker, a classmate, someone who bullies you on social media, the people on the other side of the political divide, whatever it might be. And we've heard it all our lives in this world. Love your neighbour, but hate your enemy. But Jesus says something different. Something that we can't manage on our own. Something that is so counterintuitive to the way that human beings are, that it's going to take something outside of ourselves to change. And that is the Spirit of God. So let's allow gentleness be evident to all. Let's allow gentleness to come to fruition in the way that we treat each other, the way that we treat those who are hurting in this world, and also even towards the people who seek to hurt us. It doesn't mean to lie down and let people roll over us and be doormats. It means to allow gentleness, this strength under control, to come to fruition in our lives.
Search me, know me, try me and see every worthless affection hidden in me. All I'm asking for is that you'd cleanse me, Lord. Create in me a heart that's clean. Conquer the power of secret shame. Come wash away the guilty stain of all my sin. try